Okay, so let's unpack this. We're diving into, well, a stack of notes today, really. And they offer this truly jarring, profound look at being human.
Yeah, sometimes pretty uncomfortable too.
Definitely. And forget polished essays.
Yeah.
Right. This is more like raw, fragmented insights.
Exactly. Almost like peering directly into someone's mind while they're grappling with, the biggest questions.
That's right. So we're exploring a source that really takes on the human condition, how we see the world, how we know things.
And ourselves, crucially,
Yeah.
and what drives us, like why we're always so busy.
Right. And that search for truth, especially the ultimate kind of questions about existence and belief.
Yeah.
So our mission in this deep dive really is to pull out the most important nuggets, the surprising insights, maybe some challenging ideas.
And see what this perspective, which is centuries old, can still show us about ourselves today.
Yeah, get ready. Some observations might just feel like holding up a mirror to, your own habits and assumptions. Let's just jump right in because one of the first things that really hits you in these notes is this fundamental observation. Man is a creature of stark contradictions.
And not just a little contradictory. I mean, it's presented as this powerful paradox.
Like what?
Well, the author says man is, in a sense, a nothing in comparison with the infinite, completely dwarfed by everything.
Mhm.
But at the same time, in all in comparison with the nothing,
Yeah.
like miraculously existing above pure non-existence.
So we're stuck in the middle.
Kind of, described as existing in a sort of mean between nothing and everything, and fundamentally unable to really grasp either extreme.
Wow. That is a heavy starting point. Caught between everything and nothing. So how does the source break down this mix of what he calls greatness and wretchedness? Where do they come from?
The notes get pretty specific there. Our greatness, he says, comes mainly from thought. All the dignity of man consists in thought.
Okay, thought makes us great.
Yeah, but what's fascinating is that even knowing our own misery, our limitations,
Yeah.
is presented as part of that greatness.
Really? How so?
It's the capacity for reflection itself. Being aware of our condition, that's what elevates us, apparently.
So wait, even just acknowledging how small or limited we are is paradoxically a kind of greatness.
Exactly. The awareness is key, according to this view. But then, of course, there's the flip side, our wretchedness,
Right. Where does that come from?
directly from our limitations, our ignorance, our dependence on, things outside ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe most powerfully, this inner emptiness or void. The notes talk about how when we're completely at rest with nothing to do,
Yeah.
we feel our nothingness, his forlornness, his insufficiency, his weakness, his emptiness.
So this duality, this mix, it's just fundamental to who we are, high potential and deep limitations.
Absolutely. Seen as core to our being.
And the source warns against only looking at one side, like it's dangerous.
Yeah, there's definitely a warning. Focus only on the greatness, you get pride. Focus only on the wretchedness, you get despair. So the view presented is that, true understanding means recognizing both at the same time.
This idea of being caught between everything and nothing, this deep mix. What stands out to you about that? It feels like a tension we still deal with, right?
It really does. It pushes against easy answers, doesn't it? You can't just celebrate human achievement or only dwell on our flaws.
It forces you to hold both.
Exactly. Two sides of the same coin. And recognizing that is the starting point for self-understanding, at least according to this author.
Okay, so if that's our fundamental state, let's unpack how these notes describe the tools we actually use to understand the world and how, well, unreliable they can be.
Right. The source is pretty skeptical about our everyday faculties, our senses, for instance, limited, right?
How so?
Well, they can't perceive extremes. Too much light blinds us, too little, we see nothing. Same with sound, distance, all that.
Makes sense. And reason.
Reason is valuable, sure. But it's also seen as easily deceived. It hits walls, especially when trying to grasp, like, ultimate beginnings or ends.
And this is where it gets really interesting, isn't it? The power of something less rational. Imagination.
Ah, yes, imagination. This source gives it immense power. Almost frightening, really.
Frightening.
Yeah, it's called that deceitful part in man, even the mistress of error and falsity. The argument is that it establishes this second nature in us. It basically overrides reality.
It overrides reality. Wow. How does it do that?
Think about its influence on reputation, the respect we give to status, the laws we follow, and incredibly, how it can make us feel happy or sad, even when our reason is saying, wait, This doesn't make sense.
So it's not just daydreaming, it actively shapes our social reality, what we value.
Precisely. The notes give these vivid examples, like why do we honor a magistrate? Not just for wisdom, maybe, but for the robes, the fancy setting, the assistants.
The outward show.
Exactly. It's the imagination that gives weight and authority to all that external stuff. The source notes how superficial things, someone's fancy hairstyle, expensive clothes signal status, and our imagination just assigns respect based on these arbitrary signs.
Even bowing and stuff.
Yeah, he points out how bowing looks kind of silly if you analyze it rationally, put yourself to inconvenience, but it works. It's a clear signal of power that imagination reinforces.
Okay, so imagination is huge, and custom seems just as powerful in shaping what we believe.
Yes, custom, described as another source of this second nature, maybe even the source of our strongest beliefs.
Like what?
Like being absolutely sure the sun will rise tomorrow. We don't prove that logically every morning, right? It's habit, experience, custom.
Huh.
The notes claim custom makes unreasonable things become most reasonable. Why do we accept rule by birthright in some places, or feel genuinely offended by an insult just because society says we should?
Custom.
Right, and the author makes this really provocative claim that custom basically creates the whole of equity, or justice.
Justice comes from custom.
Yeah, and that if you try to trace justice back to some fundamental, universal, rational principle, you actually destroy its authority. Its power comes just from the fact that it is accepted.
That's a bit bleak.
It leads to this stark idea. Since we couldn't make what's inherently just strong, we ended up making what is strong just. Power dictates custom, which dictates justice.
So imagination and custom, these incredibly powerful, maybe deceptive forces, they shape our reality, our sense of justice, maybe more than pure reason does.
That certainly seems to be a key argument here. And the notes contrast different ways of knowing. There's the geometric mind.
The logical one?
Yeah, deals with clear, abstract principles, but they're often remote, take effort to grasp. Then there's the intuitive mind,
Which is?
where principles are common, seen at a glance, known immediately. The author notes that judging by feeling or intuition is different from reasoning, which needs principles.
Feeling versus reasoning.
And crucially, the text states, we know truth, not only by the reason, but also by the heart. Fundamental truths, first principles are known this way, by the heart, by intuition. And reason can't really argue against those core convictions.
Think about that for a second. A time you reacted strongly based on intuition, maybe, or followed a custom, even if it didn't seem totally logical. How do these ideas about imagination, custom, feeling, reason, how does that resonate with your own experience? It makes you question how much of what we think is rational is built on these other foundations.
It definitely does.
Okay. So building on this idea of inner emptiness and, well, unreliable tools for knowing, the notes offer this really striking, maybe a bit bleak, explanation for a lot of human behavior, why we're always so busy.
This brings us to that core concept the source identifies, weariness, or ennui, the French word.
Weariness.
Yeah, the author puts it starkly. Nothing is so insufferable to man as to be completely at rest, without passions, without business, without diversion, without study.
So being still is unbearable.
In that state, without distractions, he says, man is forced to confront his inner condition. That nothingness, his forlornness, his insufficiency, his weakness, his emptiness.
And that leads to
Weariness, gloom, sadness, fretfulness, vexation, despair. Basically, being completely at rest forces us to look inward. And according to this source, what we find there is deeply uncomfortable.
wow. So the universal response is
Diversion, that's the key concept. Diversion isn't just fun and games. It's presented as the fundamental way we escape this inner misery.
it's an escape mechanism.
Pretty much. And it's not about the object itself winning the game, catching the hare, getting the promotion. It's the agitation, the busyness, the distraction it causes that stops us from thinking about our unhappy finite condition.
Even for powerful people, like kings.
Especially them, the source says. Despite all their power, they need constant diversion hunting, building, gambling, war to avoid that internal confrontation.
So the core insight here is a vast amount of human activity is just us running from ourselves, keeping busy so we don't have to face this inherent emptiness or misery.
That's the profound and maybe unsettling observation. Yeah. Diversion, the notes say, amuses us and leads us unconsciously to death.
Unconsciously to death. Heavy.
And we spend our lives focused on the past or the future, right? Anything but the present moment, which is the only one we actually have.
It's a really powerful commentary on our need for constant distraction, isn't it? To avoid discomfort, self-reflection, awareness of our limits.
It absolutely is.
Consider, what activities you instinctively go for when you're idle or bored. Could they be a form of this diversion, a way to avoid deeper feelings or thoughts? This idea really makes you examine your own habits, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. It really is.
So this restlessness, this weariness, this misery that emerges when we're not distracted, it seems to lead almost inevitably to bigger questions, right? About existence, meaning what happens next.
Absolutely. The source argues really forcefully
Yeah.
that being indifferent to our eternal fate, whether it's annihilation or eternal unhappiness, is not just terrible, it's profoundly irrational, given what's potentially at stake.
So we have to figure it out.
He presents it as our first interest and our first duty to enlighten ourselves on this subject. You can't just ignore it, rationally speaking.
But wait, we just talked about how limited reason is, how it hits walls with these big questions. How can we possibly hope to find truth in ultimate matters, God, the soul, if reason can't get us there?
That's the exact challenge the source acknowledges. Reason alone hits contradictions it can't solve.
Like what?
Like, the idea that God exists is called incomprehensible, beyond our grasp. But then, the idea that he does not exist is presented as equally incomprehensible. Reason gets stuck.
So what then?
The text reiterates that while reason can persuade us partially, it's custom and habit that form our strongest beliefs.
Back to custom again.
Yeah. So to truly believe in these ultimate things, the author suggests we need to persuade not just the mind with arguments, but also the automaton, our habits, our body, our customs. Both parts need to be inclined towards belief, which raises that important question. How do we navigate this search for ultimate truth when our ways of knowing reason, intuition, custom seem so fractured?
And the notes seem to argue that these ultimate questions, these deep paradoxes about being human, our inability to find rest, they're best addressed, maybe only addressed, by religion.
That's the path the notes ultimately take, yes. The author proposes a specific standard, a criterion for what a true religion must do.
Which is?
It has to understand and explain man's paradoxical nature, both the greatness and the wretchedness, and crucially, give a reason for this contradiction.
And the reason given here is?
According to the notes, it's the concept of original sin, the idea that humanity has a fallen nature causing this internal conflict. The religion must also show that man can only be truly happy in God, but is fundamentally opposed to God in his current state.
Okay, and the source claims that Christianity uniquely fulfills this criteria.
That is the assertion made quite strongly in the text, yes. It claims Christianity alone truly gets this core human condition, this tension, and offers the only viable remedies.
And specifically through?
Specifically revealing that God is known and accessible only by Jesus Christ. The notes state pretty emphatically that without Christ, from this perspective, there's but vice, misery, darkness, death, despair.
Right. So what kind of evidence then does the source actually present within these notes for this specific belief claim?
Several lines of argument are brought up, trying to persuade both, the mind and that automaton we talked about.
Okay.
A major one is the emphasis on prophecies. The notes really stress that Christianity is founded on a preceding religion, Judaism, which has ancient books.
The Old Testament.
Right. Containing detailed prophecies that the author believes specifically foretell the coming of Christ, his suffering, even the calling of non-Jewish people, the Gentiles, into belief.
So it's pointing to a long historical arc fulfilled in Christ.
Exactly. And related to that is this concept of types.
Types. What are those?
The idea is that the Old Testament contains figures or events like ancient sacrifices, the journey to the Promised Land, specific things in Jewish history that are presented as prefiguring Christ. They have a double meaning.
A literal one and a hidden one.
Yeah, a literal historical meaning and a hidden spiritual or typical meaning pointing to Christ. The source argues that recognizing this typical meaning is key to understanding Scripture, even reconciling parts that seem contradictory.
Interesting. What about more common proofs, like miracles? Are they mentioned?
Miracles are definitely mentioned as supports, as proof of divine authority. But there's a crucial qualification the author includes.
Which is?
Miracles are for doctrine and not doctrine for miracles, which suggests their role is to support the teaching, the message, not that the teaching is just derived from the miracles.
Okay, support, not the foundation itself.
Seems to be the idea. And then there's that very unique point about the Jewish people themselves acting as evidence.
Right, you mentioned that. How does that work again? It sounds counterintuitive.
It is distinctive. The source suggests that the Jews, by meticulously preserving their ancient books and prophecies through history, while rejecting Christ as the Messiah predicted in those books, actually serve as independent, irreproachable witnesses to the fulfillment of those prophecies.
Because they didn't convert.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The argument goes, if they had all converted, you could question their testimony about the original prophecies. But their denial, while preserving the texts, makes them unbiased witnesses in this view.
That's a really unusual argument.
It is. And finally, it's not all about these external proofs like prophecies or witnesses, right?
No, the notes also talk about inner conviction. Belief isn't presented as purely intellectual, like agreeing with proofs.
Right.
God, the source suggests, can incline hearts to believe, providing a kind of deeper, maybe more effective conviction than just rational arguments alone can achieve for some people.
So an internal element, too.
Yeah. And the notes also include some critiques, don't they, of other religious figures or groups the author saw as contrasts.
Yes, briefly. The author contrasts figures like Muhammad, stating he lacked the kind of proofs, miracles, prophecies that the source deems necessary. Paganism is seen as lacking a proper foundation or understanding of the human condition.
And critiques within Christianity, too.
Yes, and quite pointed ones, actually, particularly against certain factions or methods. He strongly criticizes something called casuistry, which was associated with the Jesuits at the time.
Casuistry, what's that?
It was a method for applying general moral rules to specific, complex cases. But the source felt it was often used to kind of bend the rules, make things too easy, leading to what he saw as moral laxness, trying too hard to please the world.
Okay.
And he seems to contrast this with the stricter views associated with the place called Port Royal. So it's tied into specific historical and theological debates of his time. It's important we see these as the specific viewpoints presented in this text, not necessarily universal judgments.
Right, reporting the source's view. Okay, so bringing this all together, what does this dense, fragmented collection of notes really offer us in conclusion?
Well, it leaves us grappling with several core threads, I think. There's the deep, maybe unresolvable paradox of human nature, greatness, and wretchedness together. The powerful, often misleading forces of imagination, custom, feeling, how they shape our reality, our sense of justice, ourselves.
That constant pull towards diversion.
Yeah, that relentless pull towards diversion as this fundamental escape from confronting our inner condition.
And finally.
And the author's argument that really facing these realities, these limits and miseries, ultimately points towards a specific path for finding truth and resolving the human condition, a path presented through belief in Christianity.
We've definitely touched on some memorable, maybe surprising insights.
Yeah.
That idea that justice might come from might, not right.
Or the need for distraction to avoid despair, or that really unique view of the Jews as witnesses through their denial.
Yeah. We've taken a deep dive into a complex mind, exploring what it means to be human, wrestling with our limits, our drives, and that profound search for meaning.
And as these notes suggest, maybe the most crucial part of that search isn't just external proofs or intellect alone.
But a radical kind of self-awareness.
Exactly.
Which leaves us with a final thought, pulled right from the source we've explored today. Consider that tension within yourself, relying on reason versus relying on what your intuition, your heart knows. And maybe more pointedly, consider the challenge of actually confronting your own inner weariness, that state of being completely at rest the source found so unbearable, instead of just automatically seeking diversion.
Yeah.
As the author notes, it is not only fair but advantageous to us that God be partly hidden and partly revealed, since it is equally dangerous to man to know God without knowing his own wretchedness, and to know his own wretchedness without knowing God.
That balance again.
Exactly. How does that idea resonate with you? How does that shape your own search for understanding of yourself and the world around you?